Henrik Larsson, Celtic's magnificent seven, the super Swede, the king of kings, a player whose name brings back many fond memories to us Celtic supporters, a player who, at least in modern history, is one of the all-time greats. And when you're drawing up a list of greatest ever Celtic players, greatest ever sides, he's certainly going to be right in there at the front of the conversation, in the mix, and in that debate. Some will say, depending on their vintage, depending on what they measure players against, it could potentially be in the conversation for the greatest of all time. But again, as I said, that is subjective. But one thing is for sure when it comes to Henrik Larsson is that he is one of the most fondly remembered players of Celtic's history. A player that contributed so much to the club in his 7 years at Celtic, and a man synonymous with scoring vital, important goals in the green and white hoops. Now, many players after him have came and went, and unfortunately, if you're a striker and you're having to fill that void post Larsson, then the conversation's always going to be had. The comparisons will always be drawn. And the question, more often than not, starts with, is he as good as Larsson? Are they as good as Larsson? And, well, at least from where I'm sitting, so far, there's been no one who's came anywhere close to it. In terms of overall ability, that's where you can't quite be as good as Larsson or better than Larsson. But in terms of the secondary question then that comes after that, which is, well, if they're not as good as Larsson or better than Larsson, are they the best since Larsson? So we can look at the hard numbers, we can look at the contributions, we can look at the circumstances in which the players have played in, and that becomes a conversation to be had. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing here today, because at this moment in time, Celtic have a new hero, a new striker that's came to the front, who's putting away the goals, and he's captivating the imaginations of the fans. Kyogo Furuhashi. So, Kyogo, is he the best since Larsson? Let's talk about it.
The following announcement has been paid for by the Celtic World Order.
Hello there and welcome back to the channel. As always, I am Steve O'Matt and it's an absolute pleasure for you to join us here for this brand new wee video as we look at two amazing strikers that we've been blessed to see play in the green and white hoops. Of course, the man of the hour, the main focus, the king of kings, Henrik Larsson, a name that needs no introduction. And as I says there at the intro, a player who, unfortunately for those that come after him, is always going to be considered to be the benchmark when it comes to being a Celtic striker. That is the impact that this man had on us as fans. 7 fantastic years, many goals scored, many titles, many cups delivered, and many tremendous memories, including some absolute all-time classics in Europe. Now, as I say, there's been players that have came and gone. We've had many strikers, and they've all come in with mixed results. For every Kyogo, for every Eddie and Dembele, there's been a Rasmussen, there's been a Pukki, there's been an Amido Baldi. As you can see, these things are not all equal. And that's where the question will always come in. You'll always be measured against the harsh yardstick that is Henrik Larsson. Many have came, many have scored a lot of goals, many have completely fallen and failed at the starting point, not even got off near the mark. But the man I want to talk about today will be Kyogo Furuhashi, our current number 1 striker as it stands, and a man who has contributed a fair chunk of goals and delivered many memories so far as well. But as I says, in my opinion, there's no one yet that's came into Celtic, and even at this moment in time, as negative as that might seem, I don't see us getting another Henrik Larsson in the door. It was a complete package. It wasn't just about him putting the ball in the net. His overall game awareness, technical ability, touch, the way he joined up the play, the commitment, the passion, everything. He did a complete all-round package. He really was the complete striker. If there was something that Henrik Larsson couldn't do, then it probably wasn't even worth doing in the first place. Also, when you think about it, the sheer level of service, we get 7 years of Larsson, 7 years, completely unheard of. And to be honest, that's something that I don't think that we will see anytime soon, particularly in this modern game. And especially when it comes to being a player that we've brought in from abroad, a foreign player coming into the club, is going to be extremely rare that you get that level of mileage out of any player. Because as we well know, when our best players start to perform, that's when the vultures start to swirl, and that's when inevitably they move on. So Larsson's maybe the exception to the rule there, where you got 7 fantastic years out of him. The man says that he was going to stay. He told us when he was going to leave. He turned away big offers throughout the period that he was at Celtic, and he walked off a bona fide legend. And someone I would like to see in the fullness of time, immortalised outside the front of the stadium in brass and granite, to take his place alongside other notable greats, of course, Billy McNeil and Jimmy Johnson. That is the impact of Henrik Larsson. That is the importance of Henrik Larsson in Celtic folklore. And no one would be refusing or saying he didn't deserve it if that statue was finally erected at the front of the stadium. So anyway, Henrik Larsson, a guy that needs absolutely no introduction. But in case for whatever reason you're maybe too young and don't really remember Larsson, or you've just not been paying attention, the headline figures for the King of Kings: 315 appearances for Celtic, 315 over 7 seasons, 242 goals and 63 assists. What a conversion rate. If you were to work it out, of course, he wasn't scoring in every single game, but if you said he was, it would work out the equivalent of 73 times that he didn't score when you look at goals versus appearances. As I said, of course, that isn't true to life, but still, nonetheless, that ratio is phenomenal. Of course, as well, 2001 season, 2000 to 2001, he won the European Golden Boot Award because he put away 53 goals in all competitions, including 35 in the league. In terms of accolades individually as a player, that's just testament to the absolute sheer quality that Henrik Larsson possessed. To win the Golden Boot is something of its own, but to do it in the backdrop of being at a Scottish team and playing the Scottish League, well, that's just another level yet again, isn't it? Tremendous. Now, of course, when we come back to the bread and butter and we look at all the goals, one of the biggest yardsticks that you get measured against as a Celtic striker is, what do you do against Rangers? It's small-minded, yeah, but it is one of the most important things that fans latch onto. And Henrik Larsson, well, he never disappointed there, did he? 30 games against Rangers. He clocked in with 14 wins, 6 draws, 10 losses, but 21 goal contributions in those games. 15 goals, 6 assists. Again, tremendous. What numbers for an important game like that, and the amount of important key goals and memorable goals that he scored in those fixtures. You know, take your pick. What's your favourite? I'm sure most people instantly gravitate to the chip. That is sensational. That's always the one that people go to. What's your favourite Larsson goal against Rangers? Let me know in the comments. Me personally, I think it's one that always goes under the radar, but for me, it's all-time favourite is, of course, that spinning volley against Rangers at Celtic Park. You know, the one, the ball gets fired in low and hard across. Larsson with his back to the goals somehow manages to just flick it up in front of himself. Deft control, spins, smashes it in to the goal past Stefan Klos. That one for me is my favourite Henrik Larsson goal. Now, the chip was sheer arrogance and ability, but demonstrating that technical ability that he had, for me, the volley is the one, because to be able to control that ball with your back to the goal, with the defender breathing down your neck, when it's fired in at a million miles an hour, to just have that deft control to pick it up and then have the instinctiveness to turn around and smash it home. That just epitomised Larsson as a finisher for me, and that will be my all-time favourite goal versus Rangers when it comes to Henrik Larsson stories. Of course, another fort that he played on was in Europe, and we always look at our players and yeah, we know we can be doing better in Europe, but we did have a good period, particularly in the Larsson era, where we were doing very well in Europe. Indeed, of course, getting to Seville as well in the UEFA Cup final. But he played 58 times in Europe for Celtic, where he clocked in 35 goals and 12 assists. So again, more proof to the sheer quality that Henrik Larsson possessed. He was indeed a European calibre, top-tier striker, and that made it all the better that we just managed to get that sheer longevity out of our club. It would have been so easy for him to move on to bigger perceived, bigger clubs, certainly making bigger money, maybe playing in a more glamorous league. But Henrik Larsson essentially became one of our own. He had that feeling where, even though he was a foreign player from Sweden, he felt like he could have well have been a guy that grew up a couple of miles away from Celtic Park. Such was the fondness and how much he took the club into his heart. And that's why he's always will be, not just for the memories and for the goals and everything, but how much he embodied the club, how much he invested and took in it. He feels like one of our own, and he certainly is one of our own now. An adopted son, if you will. Celtic's favourite son of modern times, even, you could say. Absolutely fantastic. And you see the cut of the player that he was, that even after leaving Celtic, where he would go on to Man United and Barcelona, and he would play at these elite clubs and these elite leagues and still make huge and telling contributions. Look at Barcelona, for example. Finally, he got that European trophy that he unfortunately missed out on in Seville, winning the Champions League, where he comes off the bench, and such is the quality that he possessed as an overall player that he very much single-handedly delivered it to them on a plate. That's just my opinion, but you don't need to ask me. Go and speak to Thierry Henry. We've all seen that post-match interview. He didn't see many other players, but he saw Henrik Larsson. High praise indeed. And again, just epitomises the sheer quality of the player that he was. And you see the send-offs that he was getting when he left Man United, when he left Barcelona, with all the superstars in their teams, where he's been held aloft and, launched up and down in the air. A true hero send-off for even such a short time at their club. That's the impact. That is a truly world-class player. And the likes that I genuinely don't think that we will see at Celtic anytime soon, but I'm always optimistic that we could do. But it's always going to be huge boots to fill, isn't it? So as I says, sang the praises of Larsson. I don't think there's been anybody that's come in that's quite lived up to the mark of the all-round package. But as I says, we're looking at a strict numbers game here. A numbers game. Are they the best since Larsson? How's their contributions have been? How have they contributed to the team? Important goals, number of goals. And let's go back and look at Kyogo then. So Kyogo, when you look at his stats, very actually impressive for the relatively shortish period that he's been at Celtic, for about 3 seasons now. But the numbers are heavy still. 137 appearances, 74 goals, 16 assists. So again, as I did with Larsson, of course, he doesn't score in every game, but if you were to work it out as an average, how often does he score? Well, it's about 63 occasions where you would say he didn't score in a goal. Again, yes, of course, it'll be slightly more than that, but just for the basic numbers, appearances and goals and taking away, it's 63. That's the differential there. You can't argue with that. When you look at Larsson, with that coming in about 73, him 63, far less games. He's on the right trajectory. He's certainly going in the right direction. That should he stay on, as I say, I genuinely think in terms of longevity, I'm quite surprised with Kyogo. He's at a ripe age at the moment. He's at a prime age, and I think he looks very, very settled in this team. He looks like he is similar to Larsson, maybe found a home. And I'd be optimistic that we will get, of course, this season, but I also think that we could get another year out of him. So I think we could maybe get up to a good 5 years of Kyogo before he maybe moves on. Again, kind of unheard of if we get that distance out of him. I'd be very hopeful to see it. And certainly if he were to get to that stage and continue with the numbers and the vein of form that he's been on, then again, he's not going to be Larsson, but he could be very, very close to it. He's certainly on track for doing that. Of course, we talk about the games versus Rangers. You don't need me to tell you, but I'm going to anyway. 15 appearances for Kyogo against Rangers in the Glasgow Derby. 9 wins, 3 draws, 3 losses. But he scored 8 goals, and he scored some cracking goals, some absolute toppers to put Rangers to the sword, and some very important goals against Rangers as well. It's not clocked in with any assists, but again, that's a wee Brucey bonus. That's a wee side note that you add on. Just say, yep, that's an extra wee bit of quality there. But fundamentally, if you're Celtic striker and you're playing against Rangers, all you really want them to do is score, isn't it? And Kyogo has been doing that. Now, of course, when we look at Europe and the time that Kyogo's been here, of course, we as fans expect a wee bit more. I think we are looking for more from Celtic on the European front, and particularly in recent years, but it's not quite translated over the form of domestic football into Europe. There's been some good performances. It's maybe not been set in the header alight, but I was quite surprised with this when you look at it. And when it comes to European numbers for any player that I'm mentioning, I'm including everything: qualifiers, Champions League, Europa League, UEFA Cup, whatever it may well be that they've played in. It's the total overall appearances in Europe, regardless of the format, whether it's qualifying or group stage proper. And then for Kyogo, it's been 21 appearances in European competition with 11 goal contributions, 7 goals, 4 assists. Pretty damn good, I would say. Now, you look at that numbers, people have often criticised Kyogo and says that he's not made the step up, he's not moved up to the European class. But if you were to say that 11 goal contributions and 21 outings in Europe, well, for me, again, that's a pretty good ratio, and it's in the right direction. I think under Ange, I think a lot of things, including Europe, maybe come, particularly the first season, maybe came a wee bit too early. We were very much a team finding our feet. We were in transition, as they say. It's a term I don't like, but let's be honest, I think things were jumped upon us a wee bit, and such is the way that we go about our business, particularly where we kind of scramble about and leave things. We've often been quite ill prepared. The Champions League under Ange, again, we probably should have built a wee bit more for that, of course, giving ourselves a better chance. But these are lessons to be learned. And similarly with the outing last year, again, we didn't really tool up for it. So I'm very optimistic, very interested when we look at this new format of the Champions League that we're going to. 8 games, of course. Remember the format: 2 games against 2 pot 4 perceived weaker teams. 2 teams pot 3 similar or supposed similar quality to Celtic. And then, of course, you'll play 2 for the pot 2, 2 for the pot 1. So there's a good wide variety of teams to be played against, that hopefully with the form that Celtic find themselves in at this moment in time, we can move that in, and with some of the extra added quality that was signed and personnel, that we can make a step up and we can really start to play our game. And in terms of Kyogo, we've really been playing to his strengths, the way that we're playing, the way they're attacking. I think that if we carry that on into Europe, we give ourselves a right good fighting chance. And certainly, if I was a betting man, I would put my money on Kyogo putting away a few goals in Europe this year, adding to that tally, maybe putting to bed any question marks over his ability to make that step up. But for me, at least, overall figures: 137 games, 74 goals, 16 assists, including 7 goals and 4 assists, 21 goals contributions in European football. For me, that's very much on the right trajectory. I think that has shown that he is going to get better and better. And this season could be potentially the peak season for Kyogo, depending on how things go. But that story's still to be written. And as Celtic do, and as the manager says, we'll write our own story. So, Kyogo, for me, where is he in the totem pole of the best since Larsson? Well, for me personally, I would argue, and I would say that he is the best since Larsson in modern time that we've seen. But wait, I know you'll say, Steve, well, what about him? What about him? And yeah, I have looked, and we're going to do a couple of honourable mentions here, but I will explain at the end as to why I don't think that they are as good as Kyogo, or the best since Larsson, shall we say. So let's go straight to recent memory. Of course, French Eddie, another player that was lauded when he was at Celtic, and then before he made that move down south, which hasn't quite worked out for him. But what did he do when he was at Celtic? Well, he had 179 appearances in total, 87 goals, 38 assists, pretty good, strong numbers again. And again, using that, what if you were to just break it down to how many times did they not score in appearances versus goal? Would work out 92, of course, as I says. That's not true to life, but just to give you numbers, the difference for Larsson was 73, the difference for Kyogo 63, the difference for Eddie is 92. But he played more games than Kyogo. He certainly was closer to the Larsson total. Still strong numbers. Now, of course, against Rangers, we all know what Eddie did against Rangers and very fond memories of it. I was actually quite surprised when I was going through this. It didn't seem like quite as much in terms of appearances, but 14 appearances, 14 outings against Rangers, 6 wins, 1 draw, 7 losses. That blew my mind. Maybe I'd forgot that really sketchy COVID season, the dreaded 10 season. That's probably something to do with it. But in that time, 10 goal contributions, 7 goals against Rangers, piling on the pain. As you remember that classic where he picked the ball up and he swept it into the far left corner when we were down to 10 men. That's probably got to be one of the most iconic ones, I suppose, against Rangers. 3 assists as well. Good, strong numbers against Rangers, and certainly for him. In terms of Europe, he actually had quite a lot of outings, did Eddie? 42 appearances, 15 goals, 6 assists. Of course, that was Europa League. Again, that is what it is. You can only play what's put in front of you. You can only score in the competitions that you play in. And certainly, again, with 21 goal contributions in 42 games, that's really strong numbers. But still, for me, and I'll explain at the end, not quite the best since Larsson. And I still have Kyogo above him. Prior to Eddie, there was Dembele, Demolition. Now, he's a really, really interesting one. And if it weren't for the very short, small sample size, depending on how progressed, of course, then I'd be really torn. I'd be struggling. But like that, maybe with him, Kyogo, and one other that I'll mention. But Dembele, 94 appearances in the hoops for Celtic, 51 goals, 18 assists. So again, with that wee difference maker, the number's 43. He's the shortest in terms of goals to games in the ratio. If you were to say, what if it worked out that he was scoring in every game that he scored these goals in? 43, very, very short. Of course, against Rangers, he was known as the scalper. 9 appearances, never lost a game, 7 wins, 2 draws, 7 goals, 4 assists. 1 more assist than Eddie, same amount of goals. And again, some absolutely classic goals, including the hat-trick, as you all remember, at Celtic Park. The one that really kicked it all off, that created that persona that he was a scalper, that he was a man to be reckoned with when it came to that match. And in Europe, again, a very, very small sample size for him, but some great success, some great memories, of course. The goals against Man City at Parkhead, a real standout performance for Dembele in the European scene. 13 appearances in European competition, 4 goals, no assists. Again, a small sample size, but what a Champions League in there. Pretty decent return for Celtic indeed. But again, the sample size is just a wee bit too small, and when I'll give you my reason as to why he's not quite up there, I think if he'd stayed on a wee bit more, it maybe changed my perspective on that. Now, one guy that I really think goes under the radar and I'm thinking, again, it's really just the longevity for me. It's the longevity. Kyogo's still in situ. He's still playing. He's still going to get better, and I believe that he'll stay on again further. Gary Hooper. I think people really forget just how good Gary Hooper was. 138 games for Celtic, 82 goals and 30 assists. Huge numbers. Absolutely huge numbers. Again, with that wee, what if it was taking one away from the other? It's 56. He's right in the pocket. Again, he's better than Kyogo there. Not as good as Dembele, but the sample size is larger. Larsson sitting at 73, but far more games. But great numbers for Hooper. I think you really, really forget that. Against Rangers, 10 games, 5 goals and 2 assists. Again, a healthy return on performances versus Rangers, and some very good goals as well, very instinctive goals. He was always this explosive player, wasn't he? He got in and a real poacher as well, but he also had a cultured finish when he needed it. You think of the goal at Ibrox where he just passes the ball and bends it around the keeper, stuff like that. And then for every other one, there's the one where he bursts through and, Weir's soul leaves his body as the ball gets fired into the net. Great striker, really instinctive. Somebody that I would have loved to have seen stay longer at Celtic. And I genuinely believe if someone like Dembele, if he stayed on that wee bit longer, he would have continued to score more goals. He would have got better and better and better. And it was never going to be Larsson. He was never going to replace Larsson, but he would have went some way to get himself right in that conversation of great Celtic strikers. At this moment, he's something of a wee bit of a side note, but his numbers are still very impressive and worth talking about. And in Europe as well, remember, some Champions League experience, some Champions League goals, 19 games for Celtic in Europe, 7 goals and 1 assist. So again, very strong numbers for Gary Hooper. Is he the best since Larsson? No. For me, it's still Kyogo Furuhashi. And if I was to ask between Eddie, Dembele, Hooper that I've mentioned, I would probably put Hooper behind Kyogo. Again, folk will look at Eddie, folk will look at Dembele and say, Steve, what are you talking about? It's just an opinion. That's just what it is for me. Now, I looked at some other players. I'm not really going into numbers, but I looked at Scott McDonald, again, another guy that flies under the radar, really valuable striker, Venagura Hessling, Lee Griffiths, all very good strikers, contributed quite a lot. But for me, when I looked at the numbers, when I looked at the goals to games ratio, I looked at Europe, etc., they just didn't merit enough to be having part of this conversation here. So, as I say, if I was asked out all those names, best since Larsson, I would say Kyogo, I would say Hooper, I would say Dembele, and I would say Eddie last, believe it or not. Even though Dembele's at that really small sample size, I think that he had the potential to move on and be something completely great. And I saw a lot of Larsson-esque attributes in Dembele. He was quite a complete player, nowhere near the ability of Larsson, of course not, and he's never truly kicked on after leaving Celtic, but all the raw materials were there for him to develop, and I thought the same with Hooper. I didn't think he was ever going to be Larsson in terms of that, but in sheer numbers game, I think he could have went on and potentially eclipsed the goal tally had he stayed on, of course. He didn't. So, but had he stayed on, and I felt if he had a couple more seasons out, we'd be right in the question there, right in the equation, breathing down the neck of Henrik, but wasn't to be. When I was looking at this, aside just the metrics of games, goals, assists, what they've done in Europe, what they've done against Rangers, how was I considering it? Well, I was looking at what was the competition like they were playing. And predominantly that's looking at domestic football. Because that's the bread and butter. That's where the expectancy is primary. How we perform in the league. Yeah, we want to scale up, we want to do well in Europe, but you've always got to do well domestically. You have got to perform. You've got to put the balls in the net to get the points, to win the league, to win the cups, to beat Rangers, to put them down, put them in their place. That's what the bread and butter of fans expect for a Celtic striker. Now, when I look at the teams, Larsson undoubtedly played in different gravy a league. Rangers, of course, during their prime cheating EBT years, they had some phenomenal world-class talent on the pitch. Such was the way of how competitive the league was in terms of the amount that we won versus the amount that we lost, etc. He was really playing at the peak level of Scottish football. A different era. Totally move on. The class was different gravy, as was the teams that he was playing against and performing against and scoring against in Europe. So undoubtedly for the complete package of the player that he was, but also with his numbers and the era that he was playing, it really puts a lot of weight behind Larsson being the outstanding candidate. Of course he is. Now, when I look at Dembele, great numbers, small sample size, not to detriment the efforts of Dembele, not to speak to the detriment of his ability. I think he was a fantastic player. I think all these guys that I've mentioned are truly fantastic players, and that's why we're having this conversation. But when I look at the competitions, particularly domestically, it was very, very poor. Now, as I said before, you can only score what's put in front of you. That's not his fault. But when looking at this kind of, are they the best? since Larsson, I've got to look at the competition. I've got to consider it. And for me, the competition was quite frankly absolutely dross. Celtic were just cruising it, putting everybody to the sword, punishing teams. And in terms of Rangers, Rangers were rid raw. There's no two ways about it. We loved it. It was glorious times. Get yourself down the bookies and you're putting on 4-0, 5-0, 6-0, 7-0. That was the way you just went in these games and were expecting to absolutely scud them, such as the level or lack thereof that they were at. So for me, it wasn't great. And it was kind of similar with a wee bit with Eddie as well. They got slightly better, but the overall quality of Rangers as our main rivals and the teams around us. Yeah, we saw like a Hearts, for example, are pretty good. We saw Aberdeen and the likes as well getting better. The quality underneath had improved slightly, but our main competitors wasn't really there. There wasn't really a solid challenge for Dembele or for Eddie, in my opinion. And that's what marks them down a wee bit. When you look at it, Celtic were just lording it over everybody, and they were essentially watching back a bunch of bald men fighting over a comb. That's the only way I can compare what the actual quality and opposition standard was like. So that's why they get marked down for me. It's not to take away from their ability as players, but I've got to look at it. They just simply weren't playing in a as competitive, as hard, as difficult period of time. And that's why they get marked down. The Gary Hooper, on the other hand, he was playing against the dying embers of that sort of EBTA, swashbuckling, dodgy dealing Rangers side. And again, they still had some very, very good quality on the pitch and very competitive with Celtic. So again, you give him extra points for that. He was playing in not as competitive a league backdrop as Henrik Larsson was, but certainly something that's a lot stronger than Eddie and Dembele faced. Is it as strong as Kyogo? Quite possibly, yes. But as I say, it's just simply because Kyogo's still in situ. He's still playing. He's still got legs to go, years to play potentially. That's why I've got him above Hooper. And also, let's look at Kyogo. Some people turn their nose up to the current Rangers side. And no matter what you think of where they are, there's no doubt that Rangers and the general quality throughout the league is, in my opinion at least, better than it was with Dembele, better than it was with Edouard. The Rangers, if you want to use him as an example, particularly when Eddie was around, they did have some decent players and some good performances. And we can see, of course, look, they got that dreaded COVID title, their imaginary 55 title, they still got it. And perhaps that phase that Eddie was into, creeped over into the start of Kyogo. So maybe head and head, but Eddie had a bit more of a smooth run before that period happened. It was just complete domination and cruising. So that, again, points off for me if you look at that. The Kyogo came in and he hit the ground running. He had to hit the ground running. Very, very fortunate under Ange. When you look at that first season where Celtic were in transition and there was completely no expectation, remember as well, whether you like it or not, whether we want to talk about it or not, this was a Rangers team that during the time that Kyogo's been there, still been very competitive. Yeah, they the sort of layover for 55, but still playing against a team who were at a time defending champions. They then won the Scottish Cup, and still a team that got to the Europa League final. So if you just look at that very small condensed bit of detail there, arguably, just on the fact that they were winning things and doing well, particularly in Europe, you've got to say they're one of the best, most competitive Rangers teams since. Regardless of how well they perform, regardless of the fact that we're still sweeping them aside, they've got to be considered to be better than what went before. And that's why I've got Kyogo as the best since Larsson, because for me, I think in terms of direct opposition and our closest rivals, but also the general up around us in the league, I think the standard is better. So anyway, that's just my thought. It's one man's opinion. As I says, for me, Larsson in modern times, he is, certainly in my time growing up, he is for me the ultimate striker, the best that I've seen at Celtic Park in that striking berth. Hell, I even asked, as I say, when it comes to writing up lists of all-time greatest Celts and greatest teams, he's definitely in the mix, in the question, part of the equation, giving you a headache. And I always look at my old man. My old man's of a certain vintage where he's seen some fantastic players right back to including watching the Lions and straight through some of the fantastic, amazing players, guys like Kenny Dalglish, etc., who are true greats of the club. When I ask my dad and I say, who's the best player that you've ever seen at Celtic? Now remember, this is one man's opinion. He says, has to be Henrik Larsson. Such is the impact that he made. Now, as I say, some folk will laugh at that. It's perfectly fine, but it's one man's opinion. And I can, look at my dad and say, wow, that's strong praise when I see some of the guys that you have looked at and some of the guys that you have watched. He has Larsson right up there. He says, Larsson, quite possibly Larsson. He never really commits, but he always says, quite possibly Larsson. There you go. Sums it up. You've got a man that's seen some of the greats, and that's the one that he goes to. So anyway, as I say, what are your thoughts on it? Where do you see Larsson, the totem pole of great Celtic strikers across our history, certainly in modern times, and who do you think was the best since Larsson? If not Kyogo, is it any of the names that I've mentioned, or is it someone else? Now, I know, don't throw at me before you do. I'm aware that we had Bellamy, and I'm aware that we had Robbie Keane, but I'm looking at guys that were permanent fixtures in the side, permanent signings that were played, not loan deals with a short burst. No doubt, listen, see if any of the guys had signed, we probably might not even be having this conversation, but they didn't. They were loan players. I'm only talking about permanent fixtures here. So let me know below who your favourite recent striker was, and in your opinion, who was the best since Larsson. Well, that's the end of the video. We'll be getting more content uploaded as the course of the week goes on. Of course, we've got back to domestic football. Thank God that international football is finished, and we'll be back to cover that as well. If you haven't done so already, before you leave, if you like what you see, like what you hear, give us a wee thumbs up. If you want to help us out, share the video, but most importantly, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell icon. Every time we go live, every time we do one of these uploads, you'll get notified. You'll never miss any content here at Celtic World Order. And if you want to get us elsewhere, we are, of course, on X at CWOpod1888. Well, that's the end of the video. Leave your comments below, as we always do. We like to get back. We like the debate. We like the discussion. Give us your thoughts on this video. Give us your thoughts on, as I say, the players in question and where you rank them. Until the next time, as always, take care of yourself and hail, hail.